I'd like to welcome each of you to Technovation's first Alumni Career Development Workshop on how to navigate interviews and find meaningful internships and jobs. My name is Kate Foteau, and I'm the Technovation Alumni Program Manager, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. A special thank you to Vodafone for sponsoring this event. We're so excited to be able to offer this opportunity to you, and we're grateful for Vodafone's support in making it happen. Next slide, please. I'd like to start off today by finding out who's in this workshop. So if you haven't already done so, please tell us in the chat pod, what is your name? Where are you joining from? And what song helps energize or center you when you're getting ready for an interview? I'm looking forward to adding some of these to my own morning playlist. So I see we have Stephanie here. Excellent. Feel free to just type it in the chat pod and we'll get to see some of our, I know we have folks joining from all over today. We have Elta from Kosovo, welcome. Daya, Egypt, calm music, good choice. Vintage by Nikki from Stephanie in Boston. Anna from Ottawa. Fabulous. Well, I'm gonna feel free to keep adding those suggestions in and we'll get to know each other better during today's webinar. All right, let's meet our speakers for today. So we'll be hearing from Carissa Justice, founder of the organization Work Can Be Better. Carissa specializes in guiding early career professionals from marginalized communities on how to build the skills they need to grow their networks and find better jobs. And our next speaker will be Deb Boyer, Technovation Senior Product Manager. Deb has 14 years of experience managing software projects in the tech industry and has frequently interviewed and hired engineers, UX designers, and other tech professionals. She has also served as an adjunct instructor of digital history at Temple University and Villanova University. I'd now like to turn things over to Deb.
Great, thank you, Kate. And hello, everybody. Just wanted to do a quick sound check. Can everybody hear us okay? Any concerns? If so, definitely let us know in the chat pod and we'll make sure to play around with settings. But it sounds like things are mostly good. Awesome. All right. As Kate said, we're super excited to meet with you all tonight and share a little bit about our experiences working through a variety of different hiring challenges over the years. And actually, Kate, if you could advance it one more slide, we'll give a little bit of an agenda before we get started. So obviously right now we're talking about kind of an overview of today's workshop, and we'll do another little bit of an icebreaker to get our brains in the space of thinking about interviewing, which is maybe not something a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about, but we're going to hopefully get some great ideas about how to handle that tonight. And then we'll have two major sections tonight. So first, Carissa will be talking about how to talk about yourself effectively to answer to the dreaded "tell me about you" statement that you might hear in an interview. And then I'll come back on and talk a little bit about how to you process not just to be nervous about, but actually is something that you can use. Go ahead, one slide. Awesome. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus first on how to talk about yourself effectively during your job search. I think there can be a sense of, I just want to get through it, and really thinking about how you can use it to your advantage is extremely important and can be challenging. And Carissa will help us think through some ideas to do that. And then how to use the interview process to discover if a job meets your needs. Certainly, I think there can be a sense of, I just need a job, which can be very true, but there also is an opportunity to think about, well, what jobs do I want to apply for? How can I evaluate what's out and make a decision that is good for my future? And then we'll specifically talk about navigating challenging interview situations. My personal least favorite question is the "tell me about one of your weaknesses" question, because everyone loses when that question is asked. So we will definitely be talking about how to face situations that make you worry about, all of a sudden you find yourself talking about how you like to read mysteries and your childhood's dog name was Bandit. And you're like, how did I get here? Things have gone completely off the rails. So we'll try to keep a little bit more streamlined in how we handle challenging interview situations. But before we get into that, we're going to do one more quick icebreaker. So for the next one, Kate is just putting it into the chat pod right now. I'd love to hear from everybody about what activity or ritual do you do before an interview to help increase your confidence. We have some examples there, like maybe you have like a special coffee drink to like get yourself caffeinated, or maybe you go for a run and get those endorphins, or you have like a special interview shirt. What is the thing that you do to get yourself in a like, I am confident I can tackle this interview headspace? So we'll just take a few seconds to put things in the chat pod. Okay, breathing, definitely. I am definitely one of those people who, it took me a while to realize this, but when I get to an interview or to a presentation, not just immediately opening the door and going into the office or logging onto the Zoom Hangout, taking a minute and just doing deep breaths before I enter the room so that I'm not thinking about, I was almost late and the train was running behind, and instead really focusing on what I'm about to go do. I see a couple people mentioning putting on makeup. As you can see from my lipstick, that is one of my things as well. I love a good power lip in a presentation. Preparation, talking yourself through it. Those are all great, awesome things. Power poses, I like it. Favorite shows. These are all great things to really get you kind of in a calm space where you're never going to get rid of the nerves completely, but perhaps you can kind of focus yourself a little bit more into the space where you're okay if things don't go, but you know that you can be confident in what's going to happen. Those are some great ideas. Cool. Awesome. And if you have any others you want to add, keep putting them in the chat pod. We'd love to hear some advice that other people might want to take on how they get ready for a presentation or an interview. Cool. All right, so let's jump right in to our first topic tonight, how to talk about yourself effectively. So this is going to include a chance to network with your fellow alumni. That'll be coming on a little bit, and we'll have an activity for you all to do to really think through how to tackle some of these challenging ways of how you want to present yourself. So I will pass it over to Carissa.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. I'm Carissa. I am so glad that you're joining us tonight. So a lot of you mentioned in the notes that about what you hope to learn tonight, that you wanted to become more confident about interviewing. And we just shared a couple of things that some of you do to help you boost your confidence and prepare for an interview. But I think one of the things that makes a lot of people nervous about interviewing, no matter how much experience they have, is talking about themselves. And so from a career perspective, there are three major times where you're going to have to do a lot of talking about yourself. The first one is when you're networking, say, you're job searching or for professional development reasons. The second one is when you're searching for a job and you are talking about yourself on your application, like your resume and cover letter, and in interviews, which is really what we're going to focus on today. The third place is in career progression conversations. So these are things like performance reviews or annual goal setting and professional development conversations with your manager about the skills that you hope to gain. Okay. And like I said, today, we're going to really focus on talking about yourself in an interview. So if we could go to the next slide, Kate. A lot of you might not feel very confident with this, but some of you might wonder, why not just wing it? Why not make it up? Why is it so important to think about how to talk about yourself? What if you're already a pretty good communicator? Well, the reason is that the language you use to talk about yourself is the language that other people use to talk about you. If we could go to the next slide, Kate. So you're already talking about yourself, whether or not you're paying attention to it. And the things that you communicate about yourself, which might be different than what you think you are communicating, are what other people are going to reference when they talk about you, whether they're discussing, should we make an offer to this person? Should we hire them? Or if they're telling a friend, hey, I know this great person who might be a really good person to consider for the job on your team. or if your manager is talking with their manager about who to promote. Those are all times when other people will be talking about you, and you might not be in the room, but the language that you have used previously to talk about yourself really matters. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. When it comes to choosing the right language, there's 3 really big benefits, okay? The first one is that it helps other people connect you to the right career opportunities, to understand what you're looking for and what you're good at, and recommend you for jobs that they hear about, or send jobs your way so you can apply to them. The second reason is that it really increases your chance of moving forward at each stage of a hiring process. Again, that's what we're going to focus on today. And the third thing is that choosing the right language helps people remember you better. It differentiates you from everyone else. And I know there was a couple of comments about how do I stand out from other people? And language is a big part of that. So in other words, using the right words is going to help you move forward in your career more easily and more quickly. Okay, with this context in mind, let's move to the next slide. What should you say about yourself, right? Don't worry, we're going to get into some very specific things, but first let's think about this conceptually before we get into more concrete terms. Okay, so the specific words that you use matter, but at the end of the day, what we're going to be talking about is not choosing the right fancy vocabulary or buzzwords, because the specific words actually matter less than what people hear, the idea that the other person walks away with about you at the end of the conversation. Okay, so really what we mean when we're talking about ourselves is that we're learning how to control our own narrative, the story about who we are and where we're going. People are honestly not going to remember the details of a conversation or interview in a week or even the next day. Okay. I was telling Deb right before we got into this call tonight that last week I conducted over 30 interviews for a client of mine. This week, without my notes, I could probably only tell you 1 to 3 general ideas about each person if they stood out enough for me to remember. And not everyone stood out completely. First of all, that's one of the reasons I take notes. But second of all, that gives you a sense of, how quickly people's memory of specific things kind of dissolves into a couple big ideas. So because people will only remember a few big ideas, a couple of things about you, it's really important that they're the right ideas, the ones that you want them to remember about you. All right, let's go to the next slide. Whatever you choose to communicate about yourself, this is very important. It should be sincere and personal. It should be something that's true. It should be authentic. So it should feel like you, and you should feel good about it. Okay. People who know you, if you were to communicate those ideas to them, should say, oh yeah, that sounds just like you. Because if you get this message right, if it is true, if it is really you're leaning into your strengths and the kind of person you are, you're not actually going to have to think about it too hard, because just by being yourself, that's going to come out and you're going to reinforce the idea that you're trying to communicate, which means that you'll attract the people and opportunities that want you for who you are and the strengths and skills that you have. Okay. So another way to think about this, if you go to the next slide, is what do you want people to believe about you? Okay. Think about this for just a moment. In a professional workplace environment, what do you want people to believe about the way that you work and the skills that you have. Okay. So one of mine, just to share, that I really want other people to believe is true about me, because it is true, right? Is that I can really rapidly teach myself complex things I've never done before across all different kinds of disciplines. And I want people to remember this about me. I want them to believe it because it's one of my greatest strengths. Okay. So you might want someone to believe you are really good at Python, or you are a phenomenal graphic designer, or that you're really good at keeping projects on track because you are so organized. Okay. So there might be a lot of ideas in your head of different things that you want people to believe about you. And one of the things that is helpful here is to think about things that other people regularly point out and praise you for. Okay, so ones that other people easily notice about you. And also focus on the ones that are related to the kind of job that you want to have. Okay. These are the things that you should be communicating to other people in an interview setting or a networking setting. With this in mind, and you can feel free to put this in the chat pod, by the way, if you have it in your head and you're like, yep, I know what I want people to believe about me. But with this in mind, let's go to the next slide, because now we're going to start to get into some details. Okay. How do you take this big thing that you want other people to believe about you and effectively communicate it to them? Does anyone recognize, it's kind of hard to see here on the slide, so I'll describe it to you. This is an outline for a persuasive argument essay that is often taught, at least in elementary schools in the United States. I know some of you are not from the United States, but basically the format is that you start with the thesis statement, a thing that you're trying to persuade people, and then you provide 3 supporting paragraphs that have evidence supporting your argument that you're trying to make, and then you make a conclusion. Okay. So I want you to think of this big idea like a thesis statement, and we're going to focus on how to communicate that effectively in the interview. Okay. So the core qualities and characteristics that you want people to believe about you at the end of the interview, when you leave, that they're going to be discussing when they're deciding whether or not to advance you or whether or not to hire you, right? So take another moment, write down some ideas. You don't have to hard commit to this, right? Because you can change it later. This is not an interview tonight. But if you have an idea, just type 1 in chat so that I know that you're following along and ready for us to move on. Okay. I'll give us maybe about 60 seconds if we need to think about this. Yeah, if you have the idea in your head, just type a 1 in chat so I can see, I can get an idea of who's still thinking and who has it. You don't have to type out your idea. Some of you might be feeling shy, or you might want to think about it more, and that's okay. So just like that, I just typed a 1. I see some 1s coming in. Great job. And you might still be thinking about it, and that's okay. And like I said, don't worry if you're not 100% sure if that's the thing that you want to focus on, because we're just going to practice this tonight, and you'll have a worksheet that you can use to repeat this exercise afterwards. So if you change your mind about the idea that you want to communicate, don't worry. Hopefully this will make it easier because we're going to go through it and in detail tonight, how to use this in your interview questions. Okay. So before we move on, there's two really important things that I want you to remember about this, which I cannot stress enough. Okay. In this diagram, we have 3 paragraphs of supporting evidence. Okay. You can't just make a claim and expect people to believe it. And the same is true in an interview. You can't say, hey, I'm a great manager, and expect people to believe it. You need to provide supporting evidence, okay, in order to persuade people. And the second thing is that really your interview goal is to persuade your audience that your thesis statement or this big idea about yourself that you want them to believe is true, okay, that you really have certain qualities and skills. You should not focus on persuading your audience to give you a job or a referral or a promotion, okay? They already want to give somebody the job and they think it might be you. That's why they're interviewing you. That's why they're hiring. What they're focused on is making sure that the person they hire can do the job. So if you focus on persuading them that you really have these skills and qualities, that is what's going to increase your chances of getting hired. Okay. So let's talk about how to take the idea that you have and use it in any interview question you get. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. I have sad news, which is that you cannot prepare an answer for every possible interview question. And you may have already guessed this if you've ever tried to prepare for an interview, right? There's endless possibilities. Unless someone gives you the interview questions ahead of time, you don't know exactly what will be asked. And even then, even if you have the interview questions, what if someone asks you a follow-up question that you weren't ready for, right? So there's 2 kinds of preparations that we can do. First of all, we can prepare an answer for very common interview questions, both very general ones and ones that are common within the field of work that you're applying for. So a lot of people in the notes said, I don't know how to answer the question, tell me about yourself, or how, what are your biggest weaknesses? We can prepare answers for those questions. And then the second part is for the questions that come up that were not on our list of general questions that we didn't prepare for, we can prepare material that you can use to answer the question on the spot. And we're going to do that tonight. So think back to that essay format, right? There's the thesis statement, that's your big idea. And then there's 3 supporting paragraphs that provide details and evidence to prove the big idea. So think of each of the questions in your interview like a supporting paragraph, and the whole interview is the entire argument. Every question you answer is an opportunity to add another piece of evidence to the pile to support the idea you're communicating, and we want to reinforce that idea. Okay, so let's apply this by going into some common interview questions on the next slide. Okay, take a look at these questions and type a 3 in the chat if you have seen any of these questions before. Yep, there are many other candidates. Why do you think we should hire you? That is another question, right? Yep, you don't have to see them all. If you've just seen any of these questions, you've heard of them, right? These are pretty common questions, okay? So one of the things that you probably should do is to take a list like this and try to practice a response or write out some answers. You don't necessarily have to write it word for word and memorize it, but just think through kind of the main points that you want to hit in response to some of these questions. And you want to think about how to answer this in a way that relates to your big idea. So I'm going to give you an example right now. Okay. Maybe you said the big idea that I want to get across is that I'm a very empathetic person. Okay. So say you're asked the question, what are your biggest strengths and weaknesses? Okay. This is an opportunity to provide evidence that you are a very empathetic person. So here's just an example. I made this up. Okay. This is all made up, but this will hopefully give you an idea. So you might say, well, my biggest strength can also be my biggest weakness, which is empathy. Because I'm a very empathetic person, it's very easy for me to understand other people's perspectives and find ways to communicate with people that they're receptive to. For example, last year, I worked on a project to build an application for students to manage and track their homework. Our team wanted to switch our hosting provider, but one of my team members got really frustrated and was pretty defensive about this in our team meeting. I realized that they probably felt bad because they advocated for the original provider that wasn't working out and spent a lot of time setting things up. And really, they were just frustrated because they felt like they wasted their time and everyone else's. So I was able to have a private conversation with them afterwards because I understood their perspective, and help them see that no one blamed them for it. And we really appreciated the work they had done previously. However, on the flip side, because I'm so empathetic, there have been times when I didn't necessarily hold my teammates accountable for things they said they would do, or times they were not behaving kindly. For example, sometimes people have a bad day and might be a little rude to somebody else. And for me, it's easy to think, oh, they're just having a bad day. I completely understand how they feel and why they were rude. And that's true. But it's important to address those things and not let them slide to, make sure that we don't create a negative team environment. So it's something that I try to stay cognizant of and use tools like setting really clear expectations for behaviors and deadlines for deliverables, usually in writing, so that I can measure it. And it's a reminder for myself as well as other people when I need it. Okay, so you don't have to use the same thing for a strength and a weakness, but you should consider that if something is really a strength of yours, it may also be a weakness, because in extremes, many qualities and characteristics are both strengths and weaknesses, right? And presumably your strength is an extreme thing. So this, obviously, hopefully you picked up on the fact this question would lead someone to believe that you are empathetic, or supporting evidence that you're empathetic, because we gave 2 examples in there of how we use our empathy at work. Okay. And so this is how you can go through each of these questions and think about, like, what is the big idea, and like, what is the way that I could prepare an answer for this question that supports my big idea. Okay, let's go to the next slide and talk about questions that come up that are not on the list. This is what we're going to get into in the breakout room. The best way to prepare for something that you can't prepare for. You already know the idea that you want to get across, right? And we know that we need to provide evidence. So you may have heard advice to include metrics on your resume or cover letter in your interview answer. Thanks, Kate, by the way. So one of the challenges about this is that most people don't actually have a lot of metrics that they can share, even once they've been working professionally for a while. And I think this advice is actually a little bit misleading. And what is really important is to provide strong evidence. So if you say, I'm a really good manager, you have to prove it to the person interviewing you by giving examples and being really specific. And that's where stories come in. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. A story is a statement about who you are, right? We're communicating the big idea that starts by explaining a problem then goes into how you overcame the problem, and then ends with how you changed. Okay. So in preparation for the breakout room, let's go to the next slide. I want you to write down 3 projects real quick that you have worked on. It can also be, it doesn't have to be at a job. It could be in school, or it could be a non-work project like a hobby or volunteer thing. And here's how I want to define the project. Okay. So keep this in mind. It has to take place over time. Okay. It cannot happen in a single day. It has to take longer than a day. And it has to result in either a major deliverable, that means a final product or outcome, like a report or something, an accomplishment, or a change. It has to have a big result. Okay, so some examples might be training a new coworker. This is a project because it takes place over a couple weeks or months while you train them and results in a major change. Now they know how to do their job. Okay, or building a website. Okay, this takes time and there's a major deliverable. It's a finished website. So just jot down 3. You probably have more than 3. It can be personal stuff, right? Like organizing a move or a charity event. It can be running a club. It's for, you know, like a big event for a club. Okay. Now, let's talk about what you're going to do in your breakout room. On the next slide, we have an outline. Don't worry, you don't have to write this all down because you're going to get it in a handout here in a minute. Look at the 3 projects that you wrote down and think about which one is going to allow you to highlight something about your big idea, your thesis, the thing that you want people to believe about you. Okay. Maybe it's that you're a really strong communicator. Which of the projects you wrote down highlights that you're a strong communicator? Circle that one, okay? Now, what you're going to do in the breakout room is follow the prompts to explain, to tell a story about this project, okay? I will give you an example that, again, completely made up. This is not real. Okay. Explain the problem. At my last job, we had a client come to us the week before her wedding because her original wedding planner got ill and could not be there on the big day. So with such short notice, I had to take on the project without knowing all the details or the people involved, from the venue to the caterer and the florist. Obviously, the client was really stressed out and upset about her big day being ruined. Okay. So that's what needs to be done, for who, why, what were the stakes? This poor woman's wedding might be ruined and we need to make sure it goes smoothly. Okay. How do we overcome the problem? I had to double check everything with everyone to make sure it would go smoothly. For example, I had a schedule for the wedding day that was shared with me, but I wasn't sure if anything had been changed verbally as the previous planner was talking to the vendors. So I called each vendor ahead of time to introduce myself and explain the situation. I told them all of the information that I had and asked them to confirm it. And I also made sure everyone had my cell phone number and I was there extra early in case things came up. Okay, so that's how we were overcoming the problem. Now let's talk about how you changed. Unfortunately, I was so focused on making sure everything went according to the original plan and communicating with the vendors that I didn't do as good of a job communicating with the client. The client was obviously really worried and didn't know me because she hadn't worked with me for the previous 6 months. I knew I was on top of everything and that we would get through the big day, but she was having a hard time enjoying herself because she was so stressed. I should have been more proactive about telling her all the extra steps I was taking to make sure everything went well. Now, I try to spend just as much time communicating with the client as my own team and the vendors to make sure that they have peace of mind about their events. Okay, so the big idea that I was trying to emphasize with the story is strong communication, specifically as it relates to managing a project. And you may have noticed that this was both a strength and a weakness in this story, right? But also in this story, that weakness has now become a strength because going forward, I've learned how to improve at my communication. And so now it's even more of a strength. So in your breakout rooms, it may not be as smooth as that because you haven't had time to write out all the details, but you can just use this as a guideline and go down and answer the questions. And what I want you to do is try to communicate your big idea without specifically naming it in the story, right? So in my example, I didn't say I'm a strong communicator anywhere, but I was trying to communicate that I'm a good communicator. And then the other people in your breakout rooms who hear your story are going to tell you what they think your big idea was. And what we're trying to learn here or observe here is that sometimes what you communicate is not exactly what you intended to communicate. And that could be good or bad. It might be better than what you intended, or that might be a problem for you because it's not the strength that you're trying to highlight. So we're not really going to get into a lengthy discussion about this, but these are just a couple questions for you to kind of reflect on in terms of remembering how your story was received. It's not just about what the words that you use, but how other people hear it and the idea that they came away with. And maybe kind of the thing that someone else picked up on or the way they described it is a better version of what you were trying to say, or maybe it didn't feel quite like you, what they heard. And then you need to do a little more practice and work on this some more. But this exercise of thinking of stories that you can tell from experiences you've had that highlight your strengths, and practicing that with this kind of format is going to help you respond to questions that you might not have been able to prepare for exactly, and make sure that you're focused on what you're actually communicating to the other person about yourself instead of just answering the question in isolation. And so as maybe a couple more people trickle back in, I think I'm going to turn it over to Deb for the next portion of our chat.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carissa. I really like the idea of framing what you want to get across as a story that you tell that you can adapt to some of those unexpected questions, because certainly those are the type of things that I think when we hear them immediately make us nervous and a little bit tense about how we want to respond. So having a general theme to get across is really helpful. So we're going to stick with that kind of focus on the interview process in terms of like the actual interactions within an interview, and also kind of look at it from the opposite side now and think about how can we use the interview process. So not just being concerned about how they're seeing us, but how can we use it to get the information that we need in order to make decisions about our career path. So let's move to the next slide. So I think that there can be a sense, and certainly I've felt this when interviewing for positions, that I'm overwhelmed. I just need a job. I don't even know what to apply for. I'm applying for everything. And I may feel like I need to take the first thing I'm offered. And certainly there may be times when that's true, when your circumstances are such that like any job is a job that you need to take. But I think that it is important to consider what you want from your next role. So I would recommend, as you're starting, whether it's an internship process or a full-time career or part-time, whatever, thinking about what are the key experiences, tasks, benefits that you want in your ideal next role. Job hunting can be overwhelming, but if you're clearly articulating what are the main things that you want, it'll help you both kind of filter through the job descriptions and also focus on the key pieces of information that you need to gather from an interview. So I want to take just like 30 seconds. Kate has put the question in the chat pod, and it doesn't even have to be the top 3 things, but what is kind of one thing that you really want from your ideal next job or internship? And honestly, that could be something really practical. It might be, I need healthcare, or I need a salary of X. But maybe it's something like this comment: I want a supportive, interesting work environment. I know for me, the last time I was interviewing, one of the top things that was crucial for me was having a specific kind of approach to the type of work that I was going to be doing. I had been doing a lot of things. I was really interested in digging more deeply into one specific project or product. So what are some other things that you might want in your ideal next role? And again, some of these could be practical. In fact, probably some of them should be. I can tell you now that if you want to be an astronaut who saves the world as a superhero in their spare time, you're probably not going to find that job. It's going to likely be a mix of practical and aspirational. So what comes to mind? Or for those of you who have, for Technovation team members, what was one of the things you were thinking of when you were in your last round of interviewing? So another person interested in helping larger, broader issues related to the number of women in STEM or tech. Definitely growth opportunities, learning experiences. That's huge for a lot of people. I hear this one a lot. Managers, and this is something I've come to believe strongly in over in my career, the manager that you are with can be incredibly important for your experience at an organization. So you don't have to think of all of your answers now, but I think this is something to keep in mind, things that are important to you that can help kind of guide both what you're applying for, but also then how you approach the interview in any particular job. And that's the thing that we want to focus on next. How can you figure out if the job that you're interviewing for is going to provide those things that are really important for you? So let's head to the next slide. So preparing for the interview, let's say you've identified your needs, like things that are really important to you, whether that is someone just posted work that's challenging but not overwhelming, or maybe it's opportunities to move up, whatever is crucial. I think it's helpful to then consider whether the job that you're interviewing for aligns with those priorities. And it might not be easy to figure out at first, but I think taking some time as part of your interview prep to determine if that job is going to be a good fit. And that might be things such as, researching the organization. I always recommend that people, before they go into an interview, make sure to obviously comb through the organization's website, but then also just a day or two before, do a news search. See if there's anything about the organization that has been in the news recently, or check out their social media. Is there a new project that they are really pushing? Is there an interview with their founder or their leader that has been published lately? That is a good piece of information to kind of have in your brain right before you go into an interview, so you can be really focused on the face that they are presenting to the world. And obviously, they're going to want to show themselves in the best light, but that can kind of be a source of additional questions to really dig into what the organization offers and how they can be a resource for you. So what if you're not sure? What if you are really interested in something like you want work that's challenging, you want growth opportunities, you want to be supportive, but nobody's going to post a job description that's like, come work for us, we're going to give you no support, and the work is super boring. Everybody is going to try to make themselves look as exciting as possible. So what questions can you use during the interview to figure out more of like kind of the nitty-gritty? And again, this can be helpful to approach this from the stance of your priorities. So if challenging work is one of your top priorities, perhaps asking questions such as, what is the most rewarding but challenging project that you worked on? That could get a really good answer from the interviewer. Or if you are really focused on the opportunities for professional development, you might ask something like, what are the resources that are available to employees? And are those available to entry-level individuals? Are they only available after a certain number of years at the organization? And I think it really helps to kind of have these questions in mind, because any organization that's, really focused on employees is going to have a time during the interview where they ask if you have any questions. And
from my experience of interviewing, the people who had interesting questions were the ones that were more likely to stick in my mind, because it showed that they had done their research, that they weren't just asking kind of a generic question of like, what do you like about working here? They were specifically into how an organization could meet their needs. So several people mentioned in kind of the pre-workshop survey that they were looking for a way to stand out. And I think that asking questions that show that you've done your research and you're recognizing that there are things that the company can do for you as well as what you can do for them is really important. So what about more practical things? So let's go to the next slide. Like I said, some of your needs might be really specific, like logistical, practical things, and there is no problem in that. Many of my first positions, I needed to pay my student loans. I needed to pay my rent. Like that was the top priority. And it's fine to have those things like be one of the key items that you are looking for. This gets a little challenging. And I remember being in interviews being like, how do I ask how much I get paid? Or how do I ask what the benefits are? Because you don't necessarily want to seem like that's all you care about. It's a kind of frustrating part of interviewing, because for most people, those things are really important, as they should be. We should be rewarded for our labor. But there can often be this veneer in interviews where it's, you should want to do the job because it sounds interesting, which I think is a little bit of a challenge. Like we want to do the job because it's interesting, but we also want to make sure that we're compensated fairly. So I think it's okay to go into an interview trying to get a sense of, does this job from a logistical perspective meet the key priorities I have? And a few of the ways that you can prep for that type of thing is, research salaries that you have ranges in mind. See if you can find benefits that with the organization website. I've seen a move, particularly in the last couple of years, to more clearly posting salary and benefit packages as a move towards greater equity in hiring. And I'm a huge, huge fan of that. But other times you might have to dig, look into, there's obviously the standard ones, Glassdoor, PayScale, LinkedIn, but there's also more kind of niche little lists or user groups, or it might even be like a social media group where people talk about the salaries that you can expect in a certain region or in certain kind of like career domain. So do some research, get a sense of what is common in terms of salary or benefit package. And then when you're in their interview, and this goes back to what Carissa was talking about, think about how you can use your story to show that your education, your skills, your experiences, your ambition really demonstrate that you should also get that salary. Like you are worth the money that they are willing to pay you. Think about how you can demonstrate that you are bringing value to the organization and you should be compensated accordingly. There's also the question of like, maybe you don't feel like you can ask a particular like logistics question in that interview. And that's okay. There might be times where it's not a good time to ask. Make sure that you then have a contact information for the person that you would follow up with additional questions about, like, hey, do I get health insurance with this? Or, what does the time off type of thing get to? And think about ways that you can also ask your interviewer that question without, like, it sounds a little sneaky, but I wouldn't say, how many days of paid time off do I get? But you could ask something like, how does the team balance priorities and workload with vacation and sick time? And if the answer is something like, oh, we just make it work, or people don't take that much time off, that might not be the message that you really want to hear, or might not be giving you the signals that you want to hear from an interview. So this is all to say, in an ideal world where you have the ability to think about, like, what are my top priorities? How can I get the information out of the interview that I need? It can be a way to both help you prepare for an interview and make sure that you're not devoting so much time to this interview process and then getting to the very end and you're like, oh, this is not going to work for me anymore. So let's head to the next slide. I also want to be, again, I'm a very practical person, in case you haven't gotten that. There's going to be times when you're walking into an interview and it's not your dream job. And certainly no job is perfect, but there might be times where you're like, this is not a job that I need or want long-term. And that is okay. I am a big proponent of, it is okay to enter a job with an exit strategy. So you might go to an interview and you might be like, this is going to be a 2 to 3 year job for me, or I really dislike, things 1, 2, and 3 about this job, but I really think there are ways that I can build on things 4, 5, and 6 to make my next job even more ideal of an opportunity for me. So in those situations, think about, what can I get out of the interview that is going to help me interview better in the future? What skills can I learn at this position? Is there a way to make additional connections? What is my exit strategy if this isn't the job that I want? And in those cases, when you get into the interview, I think it's okay to think about, like, it sounds very mercenary, but like, what's in it for me? What opportunities can I get, and how can I talk about that with the interviewer? All right, so this is a lot that I'm throwing at you quickly, and we're going to send out a worksheet. Kate, are you going to pop that into the chat pod? Okay, awesome. So this walks through, and this is something to do on your own time. This walks through kind of like what your approach could be when you're trying to figure out, what are my top priorities and how do I prep to use an interview to be able to get the information I need to see if the job fits those priorities. So let's move to the next slide. Obviously, an interview is going to have the challenging or unexpected questions. And what Carissa talked us through is a great starting point for being able to face those questions. But sometimes you're going to hit a point where you're like, the story I prepped doesn't fit, or it's a very specific, like, practical question that is like a yes, no, blue, gray answer, and you don't know what the answer is. And if you have any examples of questions that you faced that have made you nervous or you found difficult to answer, please, pop them in the chat now and we can talk through some of those. Overall, I think it's really okay to say, let me think about that and take a minute to consider the question. In all of the interviews that I've done, I've been more impressed by the people who take 20, 30 seconds to think through something and then come up with an answer that maybe it's not long. Maybe it is a short answer, but I would rather have a short, thoughtful, high quality answer over a longer, more detailed, rambling answer any day of the week. Somebody posted, what happens if you get a job offer and you don't know if and what is an acceptable time to wait? This is a great question. I'm going to hold off on answering this for just a second until the end of this section, but I would love to talk through this in just a second. Other things about, when you're facing a tough question, think about your body language. And I recognize that this is going to differ depending on the culture and the geography, the location where you are, but it's okay to, again, visibly take a breath. Don't worry about like pausing for a moment. If you need to like wait so that you're not saying, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know, that's totally okay. And then also think about what you're willing to share. If you don't owe anyone personal details of your life, if there's a question that makes you uncomfortable, it's okay. I don't feel comfortable answering that, and move on. Next slide. So specific logistics, and this is the one where I'd love to talk about the question that was just posted in the chat. I found it really helpful before an interview to ask who I'm going to be interviewing with if that information is not provided to me, and then go online to get a sense of what they do at the organization. I've certainly been in interviews with people who did not do that research for me and assumed I didn't have technical knowledge that I do, which felt kind of gross in the situation. It felt like they were making assumptions about what I did and did not know. So research so you aren't that person. And then also review the job description and create, as Carissa recommended, there's going to be some standard interview questions you're going to come up against, but there may also be some that are more specific to the individual job description. See if you can tease out from their job description what they're really looking for, what the key problem they're hoping this person would solve is. It's also completely okay to ask for accommodations if you need them. I think the best employers are going to, in the kind of interview information that they send to you, are going to say, if you have any accommodations, please let us know about those, but not everybody will. And you should feel free to ask for those type of things. If you're interviewing in person and you need a different way to access the building, or if you're interviewing online and you need to use different software in order to be able to hear people, those are totally fine. And feel free to ask for those upfront. Same way if you want to share your pronouns, ask for those things up at the beginning so that there's clarity in what you need in the interview. And then this is old school, but it still never hurts. It's never a bad idea to write a thank you note to your interviewers individually to make sure that they know you appreciated the time that they took to meet with you. And then Carissa, can I put you on the spot and kick this question over to you, because I feel like you might be the person with the most practical experience in this area.
On the question about if you get a job offer?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So first of all, if you get a job offer, there's a difference between a verbal offer and like a formal offer where someone sends you a contract. So someone might say, hey, I think you're really great. We're going to put together an offer. Until you have something in writing that's an offer, you don't necessarily know for sure. Maybe that's the hiring manager, right? But if you ever get a verbal offer and you have other interviews lined up, you can reach out to the people who scheduled the other interview and say, hey, I'm in late stages, or I have already received a verbal offer from another company, but I'm really interested in having a chance to talk to your team before I make a decision. Is there any way we can speed things up? Now, say you have already got a written offer in front of you, and you need to make a decision. First of all, you can ask, how long can I take to make this decision? Is it okay if I take, a week or two to think about it? Or do you need a response sooner? In general, depending on the timeline, like if you're a student and you get an offer in the fall, then you might be able to say, could I wait until December, to make a decision for the following summer, say, right? But once you're graduated and things aren't tied as closely to the school year, then generally people are hiring when they want someone to start like right away. So they don't want you to wait too long. And I think 1 to 2 weeks is a pretty normal time to request. But beyond that, then it starts to put, some pressure and stress on the interview team. So generally, recruiters might be able to get you into the next stage of the interview in like 1 to 2 weeks. But if you're just starting out, they might not be able to get you through the whole thing. Then you kind of need to decide 2 things. Does it meet enough of your baseline criteria, your non-negotiables that Deb was talking about, to consider? Because if it's just a hard no, don't do it. And how competitive do you think the offer is compared to what you might get? Like, is it as good as something else you might get, or is it a lot worse or a lot better? And make a decision from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Carissa. And then my last slide before we go into the final couple minutes of summary is, I know when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to remember this, but like not every interview is going to be great, and that's okay. It's okay to be frustrated when something goes poorly, but think about what you can learn from that interview and then try again. And you might have 5 terrible interviews, but all you need is 1 good one to get that job. So think about long-term what you really can focus on in order to improve your interviewing over the course of your whole career. And most importantly, like, you are awesome and you are just getting started, and there is so much that you're going to be able to contribute to whatever career you choose. And back to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Deb, and thanks so much, Carissa. Wonderful, learned a lot today, really appreciate it. Before you all leave today, we're so glad that you're here. We'd love it if you could share your feedback with us to let us know if this workshop was helpful for you so that we can keep improving. Kate, sorry, next slide, please. I'm going to put some polls on your screen, and if you can go ahead and click, there's 4 questions. We'd like to know, was this workshop helpful for you? And then we're also considering hosting our first Technovation Alumni Career Summit later this year. So let us know which of these potential dates works for you. We'd love your feedback. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much for voting. So homework, there's 3 steps. They're really quick. You can do them in 30 minutes or fewer. First, if you haven't already done so, please join our LinkedIn group. I'm going to put a link in the chat pod. You must be 16 years of age or older to join, but it's really cool. We post opportunities there, and you'll have the chance to connect with other Technovation alumni. Second, we are giving you this is a different template than what we've shared before, to create your own personalized pitch. So we encourage you to use this template in the chat pod to create your own personalized pitch and then post it in the LinkedIn group. There's an opportunity to post in the group. Once you're accepted into the group, create a post, add your pitch, and then respond to at least one or two other alumni who've also posted their pitches in the group. And the reason we're asking folks to do that is really our strength is in our connections. We all are here to help each other. The more that we can help each other, the more that we can grow ourselves. And you can share anything with someone that you think would help them reach their goals. So in the pitch template, it'll walk through how to share with others, sort of what Carissa was alluding to earlier, where the stories that we tell about ourselves are the stories that others will tell about us. So when you share in the group, if you have an article or a podcast that you found helpful in the past, anything constructive that would help someone else, please share it. And then that way you'll be able to start building out your own social and professional networks. So on the next slide, if you're on social media, we'd love it if you could share with your friends the best piece of advice you learned today using either hashtag Technovation Alumni or Technovation Career Workshop. And if you'd like to share your story with Technovation, as an alumna, you can use this application in the chat pod. If you want to rewatch our presentation, we'll be posting it on our alumni community page next week. And if you have any comments or suggestions about this workshop, feel free to email us at support@technovation.org with the subject Career Workshop. So to close out, next slide, please. I just want to remind each of you that you'll get the most if you give the most. So please challenge yourself to make connections with others, especially your fellow alumni. And when you need help, ask for it. Thank you so much for attending today's workshop. And now, if you'd like to stay on, you're welcome to, and Carissa is going to answer any questions you might have. So if you have a question for Carissa, you can drop it in the chat pod and we can keep talking. Otherwise, you're welcome to leave if you need.
Thanks, Kate. Yep, if you have a specific situation, like a question you've run into that was challenging for you to answer, or like a question like someone asked Deb earlier about an offer, things like that. Oh, I see Anna raising her hand.
Hi, I once got a really interesting interview question. It wasn't for a job, it was for a club at my school, and they asked me what is a lie on your resume, and I just that really stumped me. What is a lie on your resume?
So sometimes you might get a question like that, which personally I don't think is the most appropriate question. I understand it was for a school club, but definitely not for an interview. You might also get a question like, how many pencils fit in the state of Rhode Island or something like that, right? And one of the things that I think is helpful to do when you receive a question like that, this may be just kind of a weird question or a little inappropriate or takes you off guard, is to say, what kind of information are you hoping to get out of my answer? Or what are you trying to learn, right? Because say it's like the pencils in Rhode Island question or the lie on your resume question. And like maybe the pencils in Rhode Island question, they're like, oh, like we don't actually care about what the answer is. We just want to hear like, what is your general thought process? Like, how would you try to figure this out? And you're like, okay, well, I would Google it. And they're like, okay, what if it's not on Google? Then what do you do? The lie on your resume question, I think, is coming from the assumption that people do lie on their resume. So then I would say, well, if that's the case, is that something that you have encountered with a lot of the people that you hired, that they lied on their resume, or that a lot of people who work here have lied on their resume? You can kind of turn the question back to them and try to like figure out where it's coming from. First of all, I wouldn't want to work at a place where everyone is just assumed to have lied on their resume and everyone's a liar, personally. But they might say like, well, sometimes candidates just tell us there is a lie. And you might say, well, I haven't lied on my resume. And they say, good, that's the right answer. That's what we were hoping you'd say. And then you just move along, right? Or maybe the opposite. But that would be my tactic for questions like that.
It was so weird because I said that. I said, I don't think I have any lies on my resume. And the interview didn't say anything. And I was like, so I was like, okay, maybe like I didn't work hard enough on one of my like things that I said I worked hard. Like, I don't know. And I also got the Rhode Island question. They asked me, how would you determine how many tubes toothpaste are used by Canadians in a year?
Yeah.
So I got both of those questions. Yeah.
I think generally those questions are a sign of poor interview teams and poor management. And so that can actually be a red flag for you as an interviewer. You know, Deb was talking about like how to figure out like if it's like a job that you want. In general, I would essentially start knocking points off your assessment of a company based on how many of those types of questions you get. Even more if they ask you clearly inappropriate questions like, are you planning to have children, or things like that that are just like actually illegal to ask, by the way. So it's not illegal to ask pencils and Rhode Island questions, but it's not good practice. Okay, some other questions. And Deb, you should feel free to jump in at any point if you see a question you want to.
Yeah, I can actually take the next one.
Yeah,
the how to answer technical questions without panicking. I have so many thoughts on this. And first of all, just to like reassure you, you are not the only one who feels like this. I know so many people who are extremely confident and very comfortable with anything technical. And then when they get an interview question that is like a technical question, it's more a performance anxiety thing rather than like an actual, like, you don't have the technical skills. And there's been lots of research that says, you know, are some more extremely detailed technical interviews really measuring technical expertise, or are they just measuring people's ability to handle stressful situations? That's a completely different conversation. I would say that if you know the answer to the technical question, but you are just not able to articulate it because you're nervous or like the situation is uncomfortable, I think it's okay to say, I know the answer. Can I provide it to you via email, or to like say a little bit more detail about like, here's how I did a similar situation, and kind of like provide general information that shows that you do know how to approach the situation. If you don't know the answer, maybe it's like a technical thing that you've never faced before, I always recommend admitting that rather than trying to fake your way through it. As somebody who has interviewed people, I am going to be more impressed by somebody who's like, I don't know how to do that, but here's how I would figure out how to do that. And this is different than the pencils in Rhode Island question, which is just kind of a silly thought experiment. I have never met a technical person who knows how to do everything. And so much of technical work is borrowing what other people have done and checking out like open source projects and third-party services and all sorts of things. And so it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know how to do that, but here's the resources I would consult to figure out how to do that. And as a manager, that to me would be more important than you knowing every single detail, because it shows that you are willing to like grow and research and admit when you don't know something, but you also have a plan to figure it
out. So I have one question I see here that I think I can give a pretty brief answer to. Are there any types of weaknesses that wouldn't be not good to talk about in an interview? I think there's two major things. One, I would stay away from moral weaknesses like I lie a lot or I steal money from my coworkers. Don't ever say a weakness like that in an interview. No one wants to hire someone who admits to those kind of things. And the other one would be like, don't lead with a major weakness. That's the core part of the job. And I'll give you an example. I was hiring someone to be an executive assistant, and it required them to be extremely organized. I think the word organized was in like 5 times in the job description. And we were asked multiple questions about being organized. And the woman came right out and said to me, well, I'm actually a very disorganized person, when I asked her about how she stays organized. And so if something is like really the central, people are very honest, which that's great. I appreciate that she was so honest, but then it made me wonder, why did you apply for this job where this is the most important part of the job, right? So I wouldn't talk about those 2 types of weaknesses in an interview. Hopefully you're not applying for jobs that you're truly not a good fit for your skills. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about was, if they ask you how much they should pay you. How do you answer them? Okay. And one piece of conventional wisdom is not to throw out a number first. And I actually strongly disagree with this advice based on science. First of all, you should know that according to research, women are socially penalized for negotiating, which means people may be more likely to dislike women for negotiating. Second of all, a very powerful tactic in negotiation, and there's emerging research that shows that this is a more effective tactic, is something called anchoring, which means that the first person to throw out a number sets a sort of point that other people feel uncomfortable getting too far from. So imagine that you're at a garage sale and you ask someone, how much does that table cost? Okay, if they say it's $1,000, are you comfortable at offering $1? Probably not. But if they say it's $5, then you might say, okay, well, I would only do one, right? And so with anchoring, I think this allows you to neatly sidestep some like negotiation bias against women specifically by just throwing out a number, but then also means that you can throw out a number that's very high but realistic. So this would come from doing a little bit of research about what's like a good range for the job, thinking about for your experience level, and thinking about what's a number that you would be happy with, like very happy if you got that. And then what I would say is add 5,000 to it and then tell them that number. Okay. So, you know, I'm looking, say you're looking at a range of jobs that would pay $40,000 to $60,000 in US dollars, let's say, and you would be very happy with 50,000. Tell them I'm looking for 55, but I'm flexible depending. They're going to feel that they may try to negotiate you down from there, but you're more likely to negotiate down to 50, which is the number you were originally happy with, or maybe 51 or something, which is even better. That's how I like to handle those questions. And I will tell you, it has worked for me every time in my entire career to negotiate. I always threw out the first number, threw out a number that I was happy with plus $5,000. And it has worked. And it's worked for a lot of other people that I have counseled to use this tactic. I don't know if you want to take another question, Deb, or I can, maybe one more each.
I think it'd be good to answer the question of tell me about yourself, because that is one that came up from several people in kind of the pre-survey.
Yeah.
I can start with my general feeling. So the person mentioned that, you know, you don't really feel like you should talk about character traits, but it might feel too early to talk about experiences. In my kind of past interviews, I've used this as a time to say, well, first of all, you know, introduce myself and then say what drew me to the job and how that connected with previous parts of my career or schooling. So it might be something like, you know, hi, I'm Deb. I'm excited to be here for this interview. And I was happy to have a meeting with you because I really like X, Y, and Z about this position. And that connects to, I think it's okay to say it connects to some character traits. It might be something like you know, if I were interviewing for a job connected to environmental things, I could say like, protecting the environment is extremely important to me. That's what drew me to the position. I also like these 4 things. So try to keep it somewhat general. This again gets to the point I said earlier about like, you don't know any of your personal story. Like you don't need to provide them in-depth personal details, especially this early in an interview process, but it lets them get insight into your background character while connecting it to the job. That's my personal experience. Carissa has certainly seen more people.
There's a worksheet, the worksheet, actually the homework worksheet is specifically designed to help you answer this question as well. But I think Deb basically hit on two of the three things that are on the worksheet. The worksheet is not the single way to do it. It's just a way to do it that a lot of people I find more approachable. So Deb said she talks about why she's interested in the job. So on the worksheet, you'll see it. What are you looking for in your career is an important thing to mention in the tell me about yourself question. Like, I'm currently a student and I'm looking to explore opportunities in the marketing fields, right? Or design field or whatever. That's an important thing to mention, as well as tying into your background. Deb likes to introduce herself, say, I'm excited to be here. One thing that you can use if you're like, how do I start like, answering this question is to use an I am statement. So I'm Karissa and I am a talent strategy consultant, and so that's like a statement that people can place you professionally. And then I say I have experience working with different startups and small high growth companies to help them build out their hiring processes and grow their team. And I was really excited about this position because it's an opportunity to do X, Y, and Z thing at a company that is working, to stop climate change or something that's important to me, right? So the tell me about yourself question, I would say try to answer that in like 3 sentences, especially in an interview. But hit on who you are, what you're looking for, and some like maybe 1 or 2 things of your prior experience and background, like in broad strokes, because this is supposed to be a softball opening to the rest of the real questions, usually.
I feel like we probably have time for one more, Karissa. I think there was a question about internships.
Everything except the internships. Yeah. Is it okay? It is 100% okay to try different things before deciding what you're interested in. And I think a lot of people feel like, I could, if I don't do like 4 internships and the one thing that I'm studying and like do everything right, then I won't get a great job when I graduate. I can tell you right now that there are people who do everything right by the textbook and struggle to get a job. And there are people who have very strange meandering career paths who end up doing something very different than what they studied or what they interned in, and you will get there. It does help to have an internship, particularly at a company that you might want to work with after you graduate, because sometimes companies make offers to people to come back after they graduate full time. But learning about different kinds of jobs and companies and industries out there is actually a long-term benefit to you, even if you don't immediately benefit after graduation. So I would not worry about that. If it's something, the internship sounds interesting, or even if you just need the money and you have an offer, I would take it. Yeah. Deb once had an internship handling bugs in a science museum. So I studied oil painting in college. And am I doing that? No. So you will meet many people over your career who do all kinds of strange things on their resume. Thank you everyone for your questions. Kate, do you want to close this out maybe?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Karissa and Deb, for answering all our questions. And thank you everyone who's stuck on and asked your questions. And we so appreciate your attendance today. And we hope you learned something. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks all.